All right, so for the next part of the video, we're going to be trying to take our 3x3 complex matrix and put it into row reduced echelon form. And again, most graphing calculators cannot do this, so this process must be done by hand. So the first thing we'll do is take our top row, and we will take 1/8 of that top row and put the result back into row 1. That will help us downsize the coefficients on the matrix. So in doing so, we will have a 1, 1 plus I, and 1 plus I, and then a 1, a 2 minus 2I, and a 3, and a -3, a -4, a -5 minus 2I for the last row. Now again, the goal is to get zeros underneath the leading 1 in our matrix. So for the first operation, we're just going to subtract the row 1 from the row 2 and put the result into our brand new row 2. The other operation is not as simple, but we're going to go in and we're going to take row 3 and we're going to add 3 times row 2 and put the result into the brand new row 3. And again, the idea here is to make a simpler matrix when we do this operation here. So now when we do those subtractions and additions, the top row, of course, is going to stay the same because we're doing nothing to it. But that second row, the 1 minus the 1, is going to put a 0 in that location there. And then row 2 minus row 1 will give us a 2 minus 1, which is a 1. And then we're going to have -2I take away I. It's going to make -3I. And then we're going to have 3 minus the 1 plus I. So 3 minus the 1 makes 2. But again, we're subtracting, so that's going to be minus I. And then for the bottom row, we're doing the row 3 number plus 3 times the row 2 number. So -3 plus 3 times row, or the number 1, makes a number 0 there. So that's a nice 0 for us. For the second one, we're going to be adding the row 3 number plus 3 times the row 2 number. So that's -4 plus 3 times 2. So that's -4 plus 6. That's going to make a +2 there. And then we're going to have the 0 number there plus 3 times the -2I number. So that's going to be -6I. And then we're going to have our -5 plus 3 times 3. So that's going to be -5 plus 9, and that's going to make a 4. And then the complex part, the -2I, just trails along. All right, so you can see here that we've made a lot of progress on our matrix. The next thing we'll do is we'll go in and we will multiply the bottom row by 1/2. And you'll notice that will put us in a great alignment for the next part. In fact, we'll multiply through by a -1/2 because that will give us smaller numbers and change the sign. So that's -1/2 of row 3. Put the result back into row 3. So that's going to give us a 1 plus I, another 1 plus I, then a 0, a 1 minus 3I, and a 2 minus I, and then down here, taking the opposite and half of it, so it's going to be now a -1 plus 3I, and this is going to be now a -2 plus I. And you'll now notice that those two rows, row 3 and row 2, are exact opposites. So in that last row, we can take row 3 plus row 2 and put the result where row 3 is. So in doing so, we'll have our 1 plus I, and our 1 plus I, and then we have our 0, our 1 minus 3I, and our 2 minus I. And then when we add our row 2 and row 3, we get that very important row of zeros. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is now try to turn our second row into a leading real number. And once again, we will multiply through by the conjugate. So that will be 1 plus 3I times row 2, put the result into row 2. And we might as well at the same time subtract row 2 away from row 1 to make this simpler as well. So we're going to do row 1 minus row 2, put the result into row 1. So in doing so, we're going to have 1 minus 0, which is going to just give us a 1. And then we're going to have 1 plus I, take away 1 minus 3i. Well, the 1's cancel when you subtract, and then the 1 minus a negative 3i is going to make 4i in that location there. And then we're going to have the 1 plus I take away the 2 minus I. That is going to give us 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. And then the I minus a negative I is going to be doubling up on us, and that's going to make plus 2i there. And then here, when we multiply by the conjugate, 0 times anything stays 0. And then the 1 times 1 makes the 1. And then the middle terms cancel out when you multiply by a conjugate. And then the 3 times 3 makes 9, and it's a negative 9i squared, making it a positive. So that's going to be a 10. And then back here, we need to multiply out the 1 plus 3i times the 2 minus I. Let's do that off to the side. So in multiplying, we can use FOIL. So we have a tool, and we're going to have a 6i, and then minus an I, and then we're going to have a minus 3i squared. So the 6i minus I makes 5i, and the 2 minus 3i squared makes a 5. So that's going to be a 5 plus a 5i in that location there. So that number is going to be a 5 plus a 5i. And of course, we still have our row of zeros hanging out down below. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is now go in and we're going to multiply out and simplify down our middle row. So what we'll do there is we'll go in and we will take 1/5 of that row. Let's do that back in red so we're consistent. All right, so again, that's going to be 1/5 of row 2. Put the result into row 2. So then our new matrix will be 1. We're going to have a 4i, a negative 1 plus 2i. And then we're going to have a 0, a 2, and a 1 plus I. And then we're going to have our row of zeros. All right, so the next thing for us to do is simplify this down and make the numbers smaller. So you'll notice that we can actually take row 1 and row 2 and add them up. So we'll do row 1 plus row 2, put the result into row 1. And that will give us a 1, a 2 plus 4i. And then here, the negative 1s will cancel with a 1, and we'll end up with just a 3i. And then we'll have a 0, 2, and a 1 plus I, and our row of zeros. And that's where we'll stop for now.